Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting us to present on this topic. It's also an evolving topic referring to patient digital recruitment and retention in clinical trials. My name is Ernest Spitzer. I'm the medical director at Cardalaysis. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Thank you. So for those who don't know Cardiolysis, we are a traditional CRO that offers also academic services. We are known for our cardiovascular core laboratories and our full trial execution capabilities. And we operate within best clinical practices and the European regulatory framework. We can sponsor investigator-initiated studies through the European Cardiovascular Research Institute, and we're based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. The reason why I start like this is because I will share that perspective of a traditional CRO in what relates to digital clinical trials. The next slide, please. As you can see in this slide, I'm trying to summarize the different processes involved in the execution of a traditional cardiovascular clinical trial. It all starts with a good trial design. Then, of course, selecting properly the sites that would participate. And that's a key difference from digital trials, as I will explain later. The site startup, regulatory and contracting processes, and of course, setting up the study team that will manage the study and the monitors that would go to the sites and monitor the activities with investigators. From there, we capture the data through the ECRF, and we perform data management to ensure that the data is accurate and into the ECRF. Of course, from there, we derive extracts that generate safety listings or triggers that would start the endpoint adjudication process, or for instance, TLFs to be provided to the DSMB or Data and Safety Monitoring Board. In cardiovascular trials, we have a high involvement of core laboratory activities, as I will share with you later. So one key characteristic of these traditional trials is that these are site-centered. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. So how can we define a digital clinical trial? A digital clinical trial involves leveraging digital technology to improve participant access, engagement, trial-related measurements, and/or interventions, enabled concealed randomized allocation, and has the potential to transform clinical trials and lower their cost. So how would that impact a traditional clinical trial? The next one, please. And please allow me to summarize the key elements of a digital clinical trial, and that's taken from the reference down below in Digital Medicine, was recently published. It has three main components: the digital recruitment and retention, that is the topic of today, digital health data collection, and digital analytics. As it relates to digital recruitment and retention, we would observe social media engagement, online consenting, bidirectional communication, diversity in recruiting, and ethics approvals become relevant for those settings. In digital health data collection, we refer to patient-reported outcomes, ecologic assessment, digital biomarkers, wearables, and mobile sensing technologies. Here, privacy becomes a very relevant issue. And finally, for digital analytics, we are talking about real-world data, interoperability, machine learning and artificial intelligence, precision trials, and precision-guided interventions. Next slide, please. This represents the version corrected to a digital clinical trial of what I showed before. As you can see now in gray, there are several activities that can be omitted optionally because sometimes it's a combination. But if the study would be centered in a patient, so that would be patient-centered, and the patients may not be recruited from investigational sites, but could be recruited from their home, or could be recruited from patient groups, communities, disease communities. So then site feasibility is no longer relevant, site activation is no longer relevant, monitoring of the sites becomes not relevant. And of course, some activities such as endpoint adjudication or core laboratory activities may not be applicable. However, the data management and the adequate capture of the data elements, it's very important. Safety reporting remains a component of digital clinical trials, and some studies may require a data and safety monitoring board. So it's key to that, and you will see on the right bottom of the slide, the participant access, engagement, measurements that can be performed remotely, also interventions and concealed randomization. The next slide, please. So if we talk about traditional cardiovascular clinical trials, we normally perform core lab activities, and those could be divided in three groups: invasive imaging, non-invasive imaging, and ECG. So if we are going to perform an invasive catheterization of a patient in a cath lab or catheterization laboratory, it's impossible to run this remotely or through a digital trial. So we need to really understand the context and the risk of the patient in order to design the study. The same would be for a study that requires echocardiography, cardiac CT, or cardiac magnetic resonance imaging, where the patient needs to come to the sites to be evaluated. And finally, we have the ECG assessment. And for that, we had a very positive surprise relatively recently that I'll share with you in the next slide. The next slide, please. Can we see the next slide, please? Great, and I was referring to the Apple Heart study. Probably you're all familiar with this study. It was basically a digital clinical trial. It was patient-centered. It didn't require sites or siteless trial. And it was key that the consent was administered by the patient, so it was a self-administered e-consent. In the context of a low-risk trial, they managed to enroll more than 400,000 patients. Can we go to the previous one, please? More than 400,000 patients in less than 8 months. Can we show the previous slide, please? Great. And telemedicine was used to perform visits, so there were no on-site visits. The patients that reported alert through the Apple Watch were then contacted to get an e-patch, which is a device that can capture the ECG recordings through an extended period of time, and that was for 7 days. And this e-patch was returned and then analyzed, and the final reporting was done that way. So as you can see, this study was completely digital, remote, and included analysis of electrocardiography. A key message from this type of designs is that you require 24/7 study hotline availability. The next one, please. So which are the advantages of digital trials? Digital technologies can accelerate the pace at which evidence is generated in clinical trials. Digital trials can be done entirely without in-person visits and largely reducing costs. While traditional trials are generally most appropriate when significant risks exist, investigating serious illnesses, when extensive procedures are required, or when advanced imaging is required. The next one, please. Great, and this is another example which was recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine in the context of COVID-19, where recruitment was performed primarily through social media. It was interesting that this was done in the US and Canada. The patients were self-enrolled, self-consent, and they provided digital signatures. Randomization took place at pharmacies. The medication was shipped, avoiding contact and reducing the burden for the patient and for the investigators. A follow-up had several layers with email service, text messages, telephone calls, emergency contacts, and finally reviewing obituaries if that would be the case. But this was a negative study published in the New England, and you can review it there. Please, the next slide. Thank you. So which engagement tools exist? For traditional trials, we have flyers, posters, direct mailing, physician referrals, and that's probably the key. You'll find these trials in investigational sites, and the commitment of the physicians is the key to be successful in enrollment. Of course, advocacy community groups, hospital or insurance newsletters, health fairs, newspapers. On the right, we have the digital alternative, which mainly would target social media, search keywords in ad campaigns, condition-specific message boards, third-party trial promoting tools, and there are companies specialized in these such activities, which are also mentioned in this slide. Please, the next one. I'm going to summarize two papers that were recently published. The first one shows a systematic map of digital tools for recruitment and retention. That means what is available. The second one shows how much of those are being used in the UK. And I hope to see the third one, which would be how effective the measures are, which is not yet available. The next one, please. So what's the problem? The problem is that the proportion of trials achieving their original recruitment between 1994 and 2002 was around 30%. And lately it became much better, up to 60%, but still 40% of studies do not reach their intended enrollment numbers. Next one, please. So digital tools to support recruitment and retention are several. And I would like just to draw your attention in this slide that the target is very important. So it's not, one would think naturally that the target will be the patients, but actually the target generally are the recruiters. So we want to promote the study with recruiters, motivate them, remind them of the eligibility criteria. And as you can see on the middle column here, several of the activities performed are targeting those recruiters. And at the bottom of the table, we can see few that target patients, mainly raising public awareness about the trials, help patients find a specific trial, and improve public understanding of a specific trial. And this can be achieved through social media, email campaigns, using websites. And of course, in terms of improving rates of enrollment, e-consent videos have proven useful. The next one, please. Next slide, please. This shows the areas in which digital tools have been used. And as you can see, the most salient is health promotion and public health. That would be in generally healthy population. In oncology, it's a very important area. In cardiovascular disease would be the third one, the mental disease space. And then we have others where this has been used, but in a lower frequency. The next one, please. And there are different digital approaches and tools that can be used for recruitment and are summarized here. The most frequent internet site, social media, email, television, and radio, among others. And these approaches are used mainly, as you can see on the bottom right, to raise awareness in 62% of cases, to obtain informed consent in 7%, to help investigators find participants in 25%, and finally, to help potential participants find trials, that's only 2%. The next one, please. Next slide. So this summarizes in a different way the tools that have been studied, and we can only determine from this figure that internet sites have been become more frequently investigated as digital tools for recruitment, and social media, of course, it's a growing space. Next one, please. And these are tools that have been used for retention. Email, instant messaging, text messaging, other computer program software. And these approaches are mainly used to prompt or remind to attend or complete tasks, or to attend visits. These have been also used for digital capture of new data, automation of existing data, and communication to maintain engagement with the trial. The next one, please. So these are results of the survey that included 24 UK clinical trial units in terms of experience with recruitment tools. And as we can see in the slide, database tools were mostly used in 46%, social media only in 27%, and trial websites 17%, and others in a less frequency. And for retention tools on the bottom table, we see that SMS and email reminders are generally used, while study websites or apps are used in less frequency, as much as social media only in 7%. The next one, please. Next slide, please. So these are the considerations when using digital tools. Security becomes very relevant, transparency with the patient, where the data is going, who is managing the data, how can we trace the data. The human interaction factor needs to be weighted when making decisions to run trials. There could be obstacles and risks that need to be assessed, and of course the potential benefits. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this approach adds to inclusivity and engagement. And by inclusivity means that digital trials can reach patients that normally would not be reachable because they are not living close to a research center, for instance, or not in a country or a city where research is very active. The next one, please. Next slide, please. Well, I wanted to share with you that just this week, Pharmatech Outlook has given us a very good news. We became selected as one of the top CROs in Europe, and we are very proud and humbled by this recognition. And I thought it was nice to share this in this meeting, as this is going to be announced this week. And I would like to see my last slide. So these are the conclusions. And again, thank you very much for being here. Consider digital trials for low-risk interventions. Digital trials are patient-centered. The best options could be out there when combining tools and strategies, and rare diseases may be suitable niche for digital tools. Thank you very much for your time.